So before I begin, I'd just like to ask just a really quick question to the audience. Could you put your hands up if you are really bad at investing money? Yeah, put your hands up. Don't look at anybody else, just look at me. Okay, cool. You can put your hands down now. And thank you all for being so honest. That was about 75% of the audience. But hopefully, after the end of this talk, I will have decreased that number a little bit, because I'm going to show you a guaranteed way of earning money. So what we're going to do is going to use this gentleman here. He's the President of the United States of America. And two things you can say about them is he loves tweeting. And also, you can see he's actually very influential. So if you can see here, 100,000 likes on his tweet. Who wouldn't like that? But some people argue that he's actually so influential that he moves markets. So if you look at this tweet, he's talking about Toyota Motor. And actually, at exactly the same moment he sent this tweet out, the market dropped. So who listens to this podcast, Planet Money? A few in the audience. I love this podcast. It's about 20 minutes every week of an economics podcast. And they cottoned onto this year. And they thought, well, what if we made a trading bot that made trades based off of Trump's tweets? And that's exactly what they did. And they actually published it on the Twitterverse. So if you go to Twitter, there's actually a Twitter site called Botus, which is their trading engine. And whenever Trump tweets, it tries to see if it could do a trade and publishes it on Twitter. Unfortunately, though, just last week, they had to shut down because, well, they're a podcast, not a trading firm. But you can see that actually Donald Trump was really sad about this, because he said, epic fail, and then the word sad, so he's really sad about the whole process. But don't you worry, because I can actually, what I'm going to do today is show you how you can make your own Botus, Botus for Bot of the United States. So thank you very much for the intro. My name's Asim Hussain. On Twitter, you can find me at Jawache. I blog about Angular and JavaScript on my site codecraft.tv, and I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. So I work with the Azure team. So if you've got any questions, if you've got any good things you'd like to say about Azure, come speak to me. If you've got any bad things you'd like to say about Azure, go speak to my colleagues over there. So, oh, yes, I also used to work in investment banking. I used to work in, any people from Morgan Stanley here? Yes, a couple here. So I used to work in Morgan Stanley, mainly in Hong Kong, mainly in equity derivatives. And this is a picture of me with, well, less hair on the face and more hair on the head. And that's not my boss, but my boss at the time liked having a replica gun lying around for motivational purposes. But, so yeah, I used to work at MS, and now I work at MS. So it's a bit confusing sometimes. And what I'm going to show you a platform. I'm going to show you how to build this bot using Azure. But you could build it using some of these other systems like Amazon or something like that. So, oh yeah, this is the actual demo app that I created. It's pretty simple. Here's a tweet, the latest tweet from Donald Trump. You see it's a positive tweet. If it's a positive tweet, we can grab it, we can see what it's about and the text of the tweet. If it's a negative tweet, we can see it's a negative tweet with the content and what it's about. And then sometimes he does tweets, you just can't really determine whether it's really positive or negative there. Here's the trades. And so, perhaps it might do a buy of Rumby. And then at the end, there's my portfolio. And one thing I forgot to put in here is the actual P&L that I made, just $61 since the start of presidency. So what are the rules of this trading engine? I'm not actually very good at finance, to be honest with you, but let's see how this goes. So the rules are this. So if it's a positive tweet, it buys $100 of the currency. If it's a negative tweet, it sells all of the currency. If it's USD, then it inversely buys and sells gold. So if he's bearish about US dollar, buys gold. Positions are held forever. And no money was harmed in the creation of this bot. It's all simulated. So what are the steps to creating something like this? Well, first step, we need a way of getting all the tweets. pretty straightforward. The next thing we need to do is we need to analyze the text of that tweet. And finally, we need to actually make some trades using some code somewhere. And we really want to make this whole thing scalable. I mean, I chose Trump's tweets, but you could create something which uses a feed of just thousands of people and their tweets. So we need something that can scale up and down pretty easily. So first problem, getting the tweets. Now, if you're using Azure, who uses Zapier? IFTT? Who's heard of these things? Yeah, okay. So in Azure, we've got this thing called Logic Apps, which is kind of like Zapier, but a bit more programmatic. So you can use it to do a bunch of different things. We've got a connector for Twitter. So it's pretty cool. We often write a lot of little Twitter apps in our organization. So this is just the visual workflow designer, and I've got a connector here, just grabbing some tweets from Donald Trump. So pretty straightforward, right? So the next thing we need to do is to analyze the text. So to do this, we need to use some AI, essentially, okay? But AI exists on a spectrum. You can have AI which you train yourself, okay? You have all the software, you use NLTK or whatever tooling that you want. You've got your own data sets, everything. And you want to base, all you really need from anybody is just compute in order to be able to build it, right? To train your models, and then you can use your models. Completely other end of the spectrum, you've got pre-trained models, okay? So you're not training anything, you're just using pre-trained models. You can either have stuff where, there's stuff in the middle as well, where you've trained your models and you just give Azure your models and we will give you an API, okay? What I really like about the stuff on that side there is you can then start using AI just by making a HTTP request. You don't need to be an expert. There's actually lots of fun stuff you can do. So we've got one, it's called Cognitive Services, called Text Analytics API. You can't train it, you just use it. You pass it some text. We give you some details about that text, such as sentiment, key phrases, stuff like that. But we just got a whole host of stuff in this section of Cognitive Services. So it's really easy to use. So we use this. So for instance, we get this tweet. So we can use the sentiment analysis. It goes from 0 to 1, 0 being very negative, 1 being very positive. What do you reckon the sentiment and value for this is? 0, yeah, pretty close to 0, 0.014. And then we can also extract key phrases from this as well. We've got two APIs. This is the quick one. And then we would grab the API here. Now, this has grabbed Mexico. So I don't know how to pronounce the Mexican. Is it pesos? I don't know. But we also grabbed Toyota Motor. But it was a lot easier to map this to a currency than to map Toyota Motor to a ticker symbol. So I went by currencies instead. And then, yeah, again, it's just really simple. You can just use the same logic app. And we've got, you can pipe them through the sentiment analysis and the APIs that we've got there as well. So logic apps aren't for everything, but they're a really quick and easy way to start prototyping ideas. So I like just using them for little bits here and there. And you can see at the bottom, we've also got switch cases, for each, do untils. You can do a little bit of programming on there as well. Okay, that's just, we've done all this so far without even writing a line of code. We actually do need to write some code. We need to actually make some trades. Okay, so I've got some code that I use to make trades. I'm not going to take you through this code. There's a lot of code. But essentially, I have some code that I need to host somewhere. Okay. This is going back to Colin's talk on serverless. We're going to be covering some of the same topics here. But obviously, I'm talking about Azure, which FYI has really great tooling. So again, you mentioned before, I'm going to run through this really fast. We've got on-premise solutions for hosting your code somewhere, right? So you've got to make a request somewhere. You've got your function. That function has to exist within a framework somewhere. So maybe a web framework which passes a route and executes a function. That needs to sit on an OS. That needs to sit on some hardware. That's on-premise. That's you have your own hardware. You look after your own hardware. And then we've got IaaS, infrastructure as a service. So you would just get a virtual machine. You're still responsible for the OS, the framework, and your application code. But then you can go a step further, which is PaaS, platform as a service. And different providers have different levels of what they consider platform, okay? But the minimum, it would be OS. So the OS is taken care of. And you're just deploying your framework and your function code as well. But then we now have this thing called FaaS, functions as a service, which is you're just deploying just your function, nothing else. That's it, okay? So what might it look like? Well, there's multiple ways of doing this on Azure. You can do it via the web interface. We've got integration in Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio, and also command line tooling. But I wouldn't necessarily do the web interface, but just as good for demonstration purposes. So you can create an endpoint, just copy and paste your code in there, get a URL, and you can execute that URL. Pretty straightforward. And it scales, as I said, elastically and independently of all of your other functions. Oh, yeah, Zoom. So, and again, we can just pipe that through to, because with Logic Apps, again, you can pump in you can make everything pipe towards a serverless function, a FAS function, just like that. So it makes it really easy to use again, and again, to prototype solutions. There you go. So FAS, serverless. Now, and there's going to be different, it's a new idea, new thoughts, there's different opinions still being generated on their mind, and perhaps a little bit more different to others. So serverless, but everything uses a server somewhere, right? That's the main confusion that everybody has with serverless. And my definition of serverless is pretty straightforward, which is you pay only for usage and not for predicted usage. Okay, so if something is serverless, it means that if you don't use it, you pay nothing. So I've deployed this function, and if I never, ever, ever use it, I never pay anything. If you were to deploy this on a server-based infrastructure, something like an IaaS or a PaaS, you can deploy it, never gets used, you're still paying for the server. So that's one of, I think, the key differentiators of serverless. And that's how I built Botus. So to summarize, just if you're on Azure, use Logic Apps, a really cool way to try out applications. AI is really accessible. Okay, it's not as scary as people think. It doesn't require a lot of effort, especially if you use pre-trained models. Okay, and serverless is a really interesting technology. We're using it a lot in our company, and we're seeing a lot of growth in the area. And take a look at it. It's really interesting. And if you do want to check out Botus running online, go to botus.codecraft.tv. But not today, later on, because it did have a couple of issues. I need a couple more days just to tweak it and try it out. But that's it. Thank you very much for your time.